She couldn't quite explain why a chill ran through her before she even finished sliding a finger under the envelope's flap. It was as if the cold traveled her spine faster than her eyes could register the faded seal impressed in wax with the old sigil of the Dupree family. A small crest, a familiar etching like a scar from history, and yet the air in the room shifted color, as if someone had unbricked a long-sealed window and let the grit of the past gust straight into the present. Years of restraint, private meetings behind ornate doors, the times she'd watched her mother, Anita, sign documents that tightened around the family like a noose and then smile as if nothing were wrong. Everything condensed into a single, dropped heartbeat. The envelope named No. Zenda. It opened with a nod to an internal audit she had never heard mentioned, a list of expenditures from an ostensibly independent fund linked to the Dupree name, and a plane ticket to Las Vegas. That read like a summons she couldn't refuse. Las Vegas wasn't a city she loved, but it remained a sanctuary for the gray transactions of powerful people. And in that glittering instability she read her worst fear. If the letter was real, someone was excavating the geological layers of the family she was born into, and she wasn't sure she wanted to see what lay beneath the foundation. She carried that suspicion to Las Vegas, tried to keep her face as even as ever, but each step down the long hotel corridor made the arguments in her head grow louder. Why her? Why not her mother? Why not the proud men who loved cameras and podiums? Why had information chosen a daughter who was trying, foolishly perhaps, to live as normally as possible in a family that never allowed normal? The answer waited at the corridor's end in the person of a man who introduced himself as Ridge, a face weathered by hard seasons, eyes that refused to hide the wear of carrying too many secrets for other people. He didn't bother to persuade her. The bank statements, screenshots of transfers, notes from an anonymous legal advisor, the contact maps between shell companies and Dupree adjacent entities. Together they sketched a lattice of an antiquated network still twitching beneath its civilized cloak. Ridge didn't judge, he simply set down a line of facts stitched tight like hidden seams, and Dani felt anger bloom in her in complicated ways. She was angry at herself for not seeing, at her mother for not telling, at the system for turning shelter into a strategy of control, and at the helplessness that clung like smoke in a room without windows. When the confrontation finally came, it wasn't noisy like tabloid spats or the volcanic exchanges of melodrama. It was a silent, grinding war where looks and pauses weighed as much as sentences. Anita admitted she'd kept certain truths back, believing it was the only way to protect her daughter from the invisible shears of family politics. She spoke of moral trapdoors a woman must cross to enter rooms filled with men, of brutal clauses a mother signs to keep a name intact for the next generation, of appraising stares that convert kindness into proof of weakness. Dani listened with her heart stretched to a snapping wire. One part of her understood the exhaustion of those who came before. The other refused to accept her role as spectator in a story that wrote her future without permission. Vernon, guarding the family gate with his brand of ethics, called it evasion, a power broker's alibi when cornered. He didn't need to raise his voice. Every ice-edged assessment made the room flinch, and Dani felt herself pinned between two gravities: blind loyalty and clear air hunger. The Dupree clan didn't wait for dust to settle. Pressure arrived official and immediate, letters reminding her of duty, sketches of a prefabricated future if she cooperated, hints of what might befall her if she followed her conscience. Private sittings multiplied. Phrases about scholarships, civic projects, and honors programs floated like silk over a hidden blade, and Dani saw how conditional generosity was tightening around her. Bill appeared with the bearing of someone who knows exactly where to place the next piece. He didn't bark orders. He diagrammed risk and reward, escape routes that opened if she signed on, doors that would slam if she didn't. On another vector, Andre's urgency felt like that of a younger mind trying to break orbit. He charted a fresh path, where Dani could keep her humanity without committing political suicide. In their different ways, both men intervened, and their contrast clarified a cruel lesson. No one stood fully with her, they stood with the version of her that fit their plans. Nights in Las Vegas dissolved into exhausted chains of inference. She turned statements over like a compulsive habit, wondering why numbers lied so well and how any payment could be reshaped into a harmless story if context was curated. She remembered childhood in a house where every door was open and yet corners existed where grown-ups warned her not to step. She remembered catechisms about honor, sacrifice, loyalty, and protecting the family name, and realized those lessons never asked whether she wanted to be an operand in that equation. Her anger stopped burning like fire. It condensed into frost, painful, heavy, so that even small motions sent hairline cracks across her insides. The fissures spread to her rituals with her mother, meals, launch events, the tacit looks they traded under lights. Every affectionate gesture weighed more now because of the signatures placed behind her back. Vernon yielded in tone, never in position. He pushed for an internal hearing, forcing disclosures into unforgiving light, and proposed freezing the contested streams. The Duprees countered with bylaw citations crafted to rank stability above transparency. Bill circulated a private memo stressing that freezing funds would spook the market and chain react through other contracts. Wiser then to control narrative, rather than deploy financial blunt force. Andre mapped a parallel information channel, staging partial truths to pressure the system into self-correction without tearing it down. Dani studied there. Designs like blueprints for suspension bridges over a ravine. Each looked elegant and logical until the wind changed. In that tautness, a dark thought slithered through the grass of her mind. Should she sever the trail entirely by neutralizing Ridge? The thought repulsed her, and then, frighteningly, it got smothered by the familiar rationales of power. Survival of the family, safety of loved ones, the right to steer one's story. She hated admitting it, but growing up in such a house taught the dialect of shadow, how to reorder facts so a dirty act became arguable. She wasn't blind enough to imagine herself an assassin, but she was practical enough to know you can erase a person from an equation without drawing blood. Reputational poisons, legal snares, surprise tax audits, technical snags that sap a witness until he bows out. Her mother had navigated such detours to hold a door open for her. The question was whether Dani would step onto that same road and accept it as a kind of inherited spiritual map. Before she let herself choose the cruelest route, she tested a lesser tactic. She met Ridge in public, no secrecy, no threats, and laid out conditions that could convert his cache of facts from a bomb into a lever. She proposed shielding small sources if he pivoted toward advocating an independent audit with true third-party teeth. She agreed that some documents should see daylight, but asked that he extract Anita from the villain cluster and focus on the machinery, the bylaws and channels that enabled leaks to fester. Ridge listened, promised nothing. He'd lived long enough to know every bargain hides a blur. She left feeling off balance, aware she hadn't won or lost, only postponed the inevitable. Rumors surfaced sooner than she expected. Financial outlets ran coy lines about a sweeping review at a private philanthropic fund tied to a storied family. PR rooms fired back with compliance. Poetry and culture of responsibility prose while the interior shook like strings over-tightened. Anita locked down her feelings and worked like a machine, parrying sympathetic looks to sign defensive authorizations. Vernon accelerated the hearing, demanding primary evidence, unredacted. Bill seeded the market with noise to pull attention from the core, while Andre built a sealed corridor to shuttle strategy memos among the younger reformers. Dani wanted to believe she was still saving her mother, the family, herself, but every time she reopened Ridge's link map, she saw her own name at the center of the arrows, as if all paths would curve back to bind her. Then a small accident pushed emotions farther. The car carrying a minor witness for Ridge developed a technical issue en route to a meeting, no injuries, but the session died at the last minute. Internal messages blamed maintenance. Insurance flagged overdue checks. Dani wasn't superstitious, but industrial grade. Coincidences that tidy strain credulity. She realized one misstep would focus suspicion on her, that in this game even what she didn't do could be weaponized as guilt. Fury at the world she was trying to tune gently frothed up, and she loathed how ethical restraint feels powerless beside systems expert at dressing harm in courtesy. Through the noise came a letter from the Dupree Center, delivered straight to her, not via Anita, not through counsel. It promised an inheritance path, a board seat, adulthood certified by the ability to keep a lid on boiling pressure. It repeated the old mantra that kindness is a capacity to cover things, that strong women are those who can clamp a pressure cooker and smile. She almost laughed. That logic had carried a dynasty, turning shelter into virtue and transparency into immaturity. She set the letter down and understood that her choice, whatever it became, would cut not only living tissue between mother and child but also the psychological tendons that held a family order upright. She began to write, not a showy indictment or a revolutionary tract, but a dense, layered paper that asked the questions any healthy power structure should answer. Why concentrate so much approval authority across generations into a small circle? Why can a public-facing fund sign contracts that sound like service but function as political anchors? Why must defending honor always translate into demanding silence from those with less power? She wielded prose like a scalpel, not in the name of revenge, but to build a sane relationship with truth. Andre read the first draft and called it a neat, risky incision. Bill called it knife juggling with a floor made of glass. Anita didn't read or wouldn't admit she had, but in the days after, a strange light lived in her eyes, as if some muscle had loosened under the weight of being partially known. The hearing day arrived. Dani entered a cold room where leather chairs sat like old casks, each occupant imagining themselves the vintage essence of history. She wasn't trembling anymore. Anger had run its full circuit and settled like heavy metal at the bottom of a glass, slowing her stride but steadying it. Vernon opened with a dry, cutting presentation. Bill followed with market-tongued clusters of numbers. Andre added soft-looking reforms that, in truth, cinched more knots than they loosened. Anita sat upright, hands composed as if balancing fragile crystal, defending her understanding of a mother's duty inside this maze. Dani waited, then presented, not to accuse, but to thread scraps together, pointing at spots where kindness had warped into control and at the seams where truth, overcompressed, bent out of shape. She spoke of children growing up in houses with many doors but little light, of women forced to wear armor and never sure where to set it down when they wanted to hold their kids, of adulthood as the ability to say no even to gifts wrapped in praise. When she finished, no one clapped. Silence thickened enough for her to hear her own breath normalize. The family glanced at each other like people who had finally recognized they'd lived too long with a cramped definition of love. Ridge wasn't in the room, but she knew he was somewhere, measuring and ready to reset the pendulum if needed. She had no verdict for him yet. The impulse to erase him had receded, not because she'd grown gentle, but because she wanted to test whether a correctly placed truth could stand on its own. If truth got twisted again, if the blade swung back to slice the hands trying to loosen knots, she wouldn't be afraid to go farther. Today, she stood midline, nudging the axes back toward center. That afternoon, financial media received a carefully edited packet. No gratuitous names, no human targets, illuminating structure, not scalps. Large stakeholders began requesting bylaw updates. Independent raters were invited in. Clauses once treated as sacred drifted onto the negotiating table. The Duprees issued a cautious statement acknowledging the need to adjust to the age and committing to the fund's stated public good. Vernon softened when speaking to the young. Bill resheathed his knives, reminding everyone that markets prize clarity. Andre messaged Dani, short and clean, time to rewrite the framework for real flexibility. Anita stood at a window for a long time, watching the city ripple like a moving rug, and for the first time in a long while, she didn't feel ashamed of the secrets she had kept, but she wasn't certain she wanted to cradle them anymore. Night dropped. Dani returned to the room that had once made her feel airless. The original envelope still lay on the desk, Pandora's box pried open for good. She touched the old seal and understood that power isn't merely the ability to hold a door closed. It's the courage to withstand the draft when you open it. Her anger eased, not because justice had prevailed, but because she'd set a stable stone under her own feet. She knew backlash would come, that some would call Her a traitor that family lines would be redrawn in darker ink. She knew Ridge would keep his channels running, that forces fattened on fog would labor to breed new fog. But she had chosen, at least, for today, not to kill the trail, not to lop off roots to keep flowers, but to leave the roots in the sun and accept the sight of the mud caked around them. If shelter is truly kindness, it will survive the light. If it's a dangerous dependency, light will burn it down to bone. In that brief quiet, for the first time she didn't see herself as a supporting figure walking ornamental corridors. She was the one sketching the floor plan, deciding where windows belong, and ready to pay if the wind blew harder than forecast.